Welcome to the Connected Leadership Podcast Live. It's, I say a new week, it's Thursday, but it's the first live broadcast of this week after that blitz of a start last week with three recordings, two of them for the podcast. At the beginning of each month, so this episode will be going out on Monday. At the beginning of each month, I interview Luca Signoretti. Luca is a Italian leadership strategist who's based out of a university in Monaco. And we talk about all things to do with professional relationships. So we focused on a particular topic today, which I think will be of interest to many of you. And that is how you build relationships once you've met people for the first time. And, you know, obviously that's even more difficult now than it is in normal times. And we'll look at it from both perspectives today. So Luca and I will just chat away, more of a two-way conversation than the typical interview. But of course, as ever, I welcome your questions and your comments as well. So please do pop those into the chat box, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and do say hello so that I know you're out there as well. You were all very quiet on Friday, and I put that down to it being Friday afternoon. So without further ado, Luca, welcome back to the Connected Leadership Podcast. It's good to see you again.
My pleasure, and thanks for having me as usual, Andy. It's a great pleasure.
So our topic today is looking at how you take a connection, a new connection that you've made, and you build a relationship with that person. And I think that's really key, because one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make traditionally is they'll meet someone new, but there's zero follow-up. And the effort that goes into, you know, meeting people and engaging with people to try and broaden our network gets lost because we're not deepening our network at the same time. We're not focusing on where those relationships take us. So in the work that you do, what are the sort of the first things that you say to people that they should do in terms of following up with people and going from introduction to connection?
Well, definitely, the first thing I tell them is that during the first encounter, anyway, the first meeting, they should somehow prepare for the next step. So this is important. When you meet somebody for the first time, you have this 5 minutes, 10 minutes conversation, try to seed the next step. What does it mean? I always say, ask the other person something like, that's a great conversation. What about continuing this conversation another moment? So the objective here is not to set the time and the date for another meeting, but it's just first of all, to double check the interest of the other person to continue this kind of conversation. And secondly, is to really put the seed in a way that then we can build on this seed later on. So this is the first part. And then, of course, follow up. So whatever we say so many times, Andy, that, as you mentioned already, it's such a waste of energy and time to go there, take the time to meet the right people, have a nice conversation, and then, once we exchange a little bit about business card, a little bit of information, and with the promise to get in touch, and then nothing happens. And the one really important point is that you never have to think that the other person should do the first step. It's your responsibility. It's nothing else for the fact that you want things to happen. It's up to you to make it happen. Even if the other person will do earlier than you, faster than you, that's fine. It's great. But you should be the one in charge of making this happen. Anyway.
The key thing I want to pick up on there is this sowing the seed and actually suggesting that there will be a next step in the conversation. And I think you achieve two things by doing that, and this is really important. The first is you filter out the people who aren't interested in following up with you. You know, absolutely. Building a relationship, let's face it, is two-way. You might want to build the relationship, you know, with that person, and I've had scenarios where I've worked with well-known people, and of course I meet someone who's a celebrity in one form or another, whether it be in business or politics or sport or whatever it might be. You know, of course I want to try and develop that relationship further, but they don't know me and they're not interested in me, and so filtering those people out saves a lot of wasted time and energy and frustration later on. So sowing that seed helps from that perspective, but it also, as you said, sets an expectation. So you're not coming out of the blue when you reach out and you try and connect with someone. But what happens if you feel like you've got that rapport, you feel like you've sown the seed and it's been reciprocated, it's been accepted, but then you don't hear back once you follow up?
Well, so as usual, we cannot say that every time, 100% of the case, we're going to have this kind of things going on. As always, it's a matter of numbers, and networking is really a matter of numbers in a way that once we have screamed out those people that are not interested, that's life, as you mentioned. Anyway, there is still some kind of the other person could, in this moment, could be very busy for some personal reason. They cannot reply to you. So what I suggest is that even if you send out this connection, basically, in my case, what I suggest is going with a LinkedIn message, and even if nothing happened, you should come back at least 2 more times. Okay, so I think it's important to allow the other person for kind of business or a specific situation, or we all have some things that we cannot definitely manage on plan. So allow the other person at least couple of chances to come back to you anyway. So be persistent up to two more time. And then if nothing happens, of course, we have to accept that for some reason that are probably really not our concern. I mean, it's not about us, but it's something happening on the other side, that things that just don't go the way we want. That's life, okay? And as we already mentioned other times, it's just, we say just next, and then we move to another one. That's fine, no problem.
It is important to stress that we shouldn't take it personally. That connection that we thought was there just might not have been, or there may be other reasons, and as a priority we're just not up there for them at this stage. That there is a really great technique that I learned from my good friend Will Kintish. Will is another expert on networking skills and on online networking, and really master of the follow-up and the relationship build. And I mean, it wouldn't be fair to say Will's been around a while, but you'll get that sense from this example. But his approach, he always talks about how he used to send a fax, and the fax would be a checklist, and it would say, I've been trying to reach you, I've not heard from you, can you just tick one of the following boxes? And it's things like, sorry, I've been really busy, keep trying. I'm really busy at the moment, contact me in X number of weeks. And never darken my door again, or something like that, or I'll call you. And he just faxes it through, just tick one of these boxes and fax it back. Now I've adapted that, and I teach that adaptation, when I'm mentoring people. And for me, it is consistently an approach that gets results. It's phenomenal. And I've seen my mentees benefit from it as well. And that is, send an email. And it just says, I've been trying to get hold of you. I understand you could be really busy at the moment, and I don't want to pester you. In the example we're using, it might say, when we met, I felt, we'd agreed to follow up. I understand that might not be a priority at the moment. So just let me know. Is it something you would like to pick up at some stage? And if so, when would be best to reach out to you, or would you rather I wait for you to contact me? Now, the really interesting thing about this approach is I use it a lot with sales as well, and this is, very much how Will positions it. But people where you've sent a proposal, or they've expressed an interest, then they've gone quiet. And, with both of us, our clients will be very, very busy people, and we're not necessarily top of the agenda unless that need is pressing. And so even though someone shows a strong interest in what we do, it doesn't mean they're always as responsive as we would like them to be. But what happens with this approach is that people I haven't been able to reach for months, I'll get a reply in 5 minutes, because they're embarrassed. I don't write it to embarrass them, but they suddenly realise that they've not been courteous.
Yeah.
And I don't do it to shame them. I don't, that's not the tone of it, but they'll take that on themselves. And that's a message, because that tells you that it's not about you. It has been about what's in their way. So that approach works pretty well as well.
Yeah, I got another one that I'm doing a course with. I don't know if you know the guy, Chris Voss is this expert in negotiation,
Yeah, I know the
and
name.
yeah, and the guy is phenomenal. And say, instead of going for the yes, so we as again, we are not pushing anyone. We don't want to force anyone to start this relationship. It's not the right way to do it. If there is interest in both sides, the right way. But sometimes we have somehow to push a little bit, as you mentioned. Try to. People are very busy, and we are on the bottom part of their to-do list. So trying a little bit to push that. And Chris was say, instead of going for a yes, so yes, I would love to continue with you. Let's try to go with a no, meaning that sending a message like, have you given up on our idea to have another coffee, or start this conversation with me, something like that. And usually people say, no, 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 I didn't give up. It's not really, I cannot. So they get back to you and say, no, no, be reassured, I didn't give up on you. So that's something that I think is really nice. It happened to me a few times, and I think it's worth keeping in mind this.
Simon Raybould has said on Facebook that he's found that the most common box in that scenario is yes, pop me on your regular mailing list and keep in touch every now and again. And that's an interesting approach as well, because I've had a newsletter go out every 3 weeks for over a decade now. I'm not sure how long, over a decade. It is really good, and if you want to subscribe, just go to my website and you can sign up for that. The reason I started that newsletter was an article in an American magazine called Speaker Magazine, which is the magazine of the National Speakers Association in the US. And back in the day, and they may well still do it, they would interview a meeting planner, an events organizer, every issue, someone who booked speakers, and they'd ask them questions so that speakers could understand what clients were looking for. And in this particular interview, and newsletter was already in my mind, because colleagues of mine, particularly Alan Stevens, produce brilliant ones, and I thought that's something I need to do. But I read this article, and one of the questions was, how do speakers get onto your radar? How do speakers get you to book them? And the answer was, send me your newsletter, put me on your mailing list, just as Simon says there. And she said, I might not read it, but the fact that I see your name come up in my inbox every week reminds me you're out there. And I talk about being insight in mind, and this is a very good example of that. So I get reasonable engagement from my newsletter, but so many people who never tell me they've never reply to anything, never engage with anything, but then years later they'll say, oh, I always read your newsletter. And even people seeing it in their inbox, it just keeps you insight in mind. So that's an option. But as Simon said, Simon put it as an option. It's an opt-in. It's not. I'm not a fan, and I never do it myself, of automatically putting people on your mailing list. I don't think that's ethical above anything else. I just don't think that's appropriate. So let's have a look at the world we're in now, because although it's been, I think, unsaid, it's been implied in what we've talked about that you met someone at an event. And that's where it's much easier to build a rapport with someone. It's more likely you'll meet someone new because you're in a room full of strangers and you're going to go around and talk to them. Whereas when you're working from your second bedroom and you're not allowed out, as in the UK at the moment, and you're not allowed to mix with people, well, then it's much harder to meet people in person. So in the current world, how are things different? How are we meeting new people in your experience, and how can we build that rapport if we can't see people in person, and how do we follow up with them?
Well, I think I would go for what I'm doing right now. Frankly, this is a personal experience, so I want to share with you. I think this is the right moment to leverage more the word of mouth, or sorry, introduction, basically. So
Yeah.
I really go this way now. I think it's really the best way to do. And we always have a lot of potential there. We just, we are all kind of lazy in these terms, that we can really ask around our network and say, I don't know, the other day I was just doing this with a mastermind group I have, and say, do you know any leadership expert in these areas, specific one? And so one guy came up with two names, and so I'm moving this way. I think in this moment, this is the best way possible. Okay, and we also regain focus on this recommendation tool that is so important in relationship building. And we know sometimes we think that going to a networking event is the best thing to do. Not necessarily. Let's first leverage our current network, and then we add new one.
I'm so pleased you said that. And I think we've had this conversation before. We both have taught networking skills, and I'm certainly, I got called Mr. Network by the biggest tabloid in the UK years ago, and it's a label that actually I've been trying to shake off to a degree, because I'm not the biggest fan of networking events. Whisper it, but that's not my preferred option. I think they have their place, and comes from someone who used to run a national network. I think they have their place and they have their role, but I think too often they're the first choice. When it always baffled me, even when I ran the networking events, why would you come to a room full of strangers when you haven't looked for introductions from your existing network first, from people who trust you? Look for the support from there. So yeah, I should reframe that. Networking events have their place, but I would much rather someone introduce me to the right person for me, or just people they think I might be interested in, because there is that space for random connections, and then I can have a deeper conversation from a more knowledgeable starting point as why we're talking, than a random connection at an event. That's easy for you or I to say, because we have networks in place, which means we're not looking to add huge numbers to that. We're probably, certainly in my case, looking to focus on the quality of improvements we can make to the network rather than the quantity element at this stage. In addition, that gives us the network to make the introductions in the first place.
Sure.
But needs must at the moment. So
Yeah.
it might put us in a better place.
Well, let me just say these two words. Just ask. I don't know if you recalls anything to you, but I got it's over there. Yeah. I got these two names from. It was specific leadership kind of topic from a banker. So just to tell you, he was not supposed to have this kind of people in his network, and he just had. So really, just ask. So you might think that a guy, I don't know, who is completely out of this, completely out of the kind of domain you want to reach out for, he might have the right question, the right guy. So really go for your network, first network, and ask the question, do you know anyone? And see the results. And then eventually start worrying about the fact that you don't have enough people. But first of all, ask.
Absolutely. It's so key. And a good example of that, we're talking about connections more broadly, but one of the areas I focused on over the years is referrals. So connections to potential prospects, potential customers. And I was working with a Europe-wide manufacturing company, or a global manufacturing company, with their Europe-wide sales team in 2019. This particular course was 2019. They're still a client now. And part of my remit on that program was to focus on share of wallet. So by share of wallet, they mean they're working with a client, and that client might be a multinational company, and they'd be working with one part of that company. How they get more engagements, more work from that organization. And as a result of the work that we did, one of the team went to one of his biggest clients and said, would you introduce me to another part of the business? And not only did that client refer him to another part of the business, but they set up the meeting themselves and attended that meeting to make the strongest possible introduction. Now, what that tells me is that that introduction was always there and always possible, but they'd never asked for it before. So this concept of just ask in terms of introductions is key, because if you understand who you want to meet and who you want to build relationships with, those opportunities are there in your network, but are you making the most of them?
Absolutely.
So,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, well, I was going to say, so we were talking about shifting our focus in a socially distanced world. We talked about how you can get introductions because you're not meeting people at events, but of course the focus of the conversation is once you've had those introductions, once you've met people, how do you build the relationship from there? So in a socially distanced world, what do you do to get people from someone who just recognizes you, you've met, you've virtually shaken hands, to someone who really knows, likes and trusts you?
Well, of course, in this case, we play a lot the trust that is being transferred by the person who's introduced us. So it's definitely easier than just meeting people in a event situation. So there we need less to build trust. And I think what we really need to do instead is to build more shared things. So common things we have. So I spend times to look for people we know in both of us, or things we have done, or of course interests we have in common, and so building this step help us to feel more comfortable, overcome a little bit this barrier of the video where we cannot meet in person, so we cannot read the other person's body language. But if we feel enough comfortable because we have something in common, that's the right way to start the relationship. And at the end, if we are in touch, is because we have something in common anyway. So if somebody has put us in common, means that we have at least small things to start with, and from there on we can build. So it's a professional thing. So if I get in touch with somebody who's doing leadership coaching, well, of course, I will build on that for sure. If instead it's a kind of more business, I'm trying to have this person, how can I say, be interested in my offer. Okay. In this case, what I would definitely do is to ask few questions, at least as much as possible, to understand how can I help that. Okay. So here we get in the process of building a relationship. I know that you have a fantastic 7-step process. So apart from probably for the first couple of steps, we take from this kind of conversation introduced by somebody, we take from there. So maybe you want to refresh a little bit your 7 steps of building a relationship. I found really interesting.
Yeah. So this is the idea that, I talked about the mistake that people make of not following up at all. Related to that is, I think that there's a mistake people make where we see a network as a box with people in it, and it's binary. You're in my network or you're not in my network, and it doesn't quite work like that. Networks are made up of individual relationships which are at different stages. And it's understanding those stages. So it's why I have the model, the 7 stages of professional relationship. So if you focus on that, instead of thinking, okay, well, I've met Luca now, Luca's in my network, move on to the next person. I say, well, I've met Luca, but he's only at stage 1. I need to get Luca to stage 4 or 5 or 6. And so you're much more focused on deepening the relationships you have, which ultimately brings a much greater reward for both parties. So the first step is when you recognize someone you've met once or twice, and you cross paths again, and you remember that you've met once or twice, and that diminishes very quickly, and that's where people come into your network and out of your network again, and a year later, even a few weeks later, they can't remember you. Then you move to stage 2, which is where you know each other. You recognize, you've got some context, you might know what each other does. Then you go into like and trust. So you've got know, like, and trust, which was coined, I think, by Bob Berg. So you might bypass like sometimes. I think trust is more important. You're going to struggle if you dislike people, but you can be what I might call like neutral. It's not someone you have a rapport with, but you trust and respect them, and that profession is more important. What I'm interested in is how do we get both in place, like and trust, because then you've got something powerful, and that then becomes easier to move to the next stage, which is stage 5, which is supporter. And a supporter is someone you can pick up the phone to and ask for help, and they'll give you help. Whereas stage 6 is advocate. And with an advocate, you don't have to pick up the phone to ask for help. They're looking for opportunities for you if they come across their path all the time. And then stage 7, they become a friend. So it's personal network. So I think we have to focus on bringing people through those 7 stages and deepening the relationships as much as we do on building a network in terms of quantity. And again, if you have a strong established network, then it may well be you're focused on deepening the existing relationships you have. On a lot of the presentations I deliver, I run a poll. And I ask people, having outlined the 7 stages, I ask people, what stage do you think is the optimum level for your network? Where do you think you should be with across your network? And where do you think you are now? And almost without fail, the numbers are around 5 to 5.5 for where people think they should be. In other words, supporter and advocate, and 3 to 3.5 for where they are. In other words, between like and trust. So there's that gap which people can build on. And if you have an existing network and you're on level 3 and think you should be at level 5, that for me is where most activity should be focused. If you've got a small network, you might be looking to get more in at 1 and 2 first and then build from there.
Absolutely. And then there is anyway the point that we sooner or later we have to speak about that we have limited time, and so we cannot bring anyone to the level 7, but probably we have to do some kind of be selective a little bit in terms of who is gonna we want to bring to the level 7, and just leave at the last 7, I don't know, 5 or 4 level. We have to make some kind of choice because we don't have unlimited time, isn't it, Andy?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the level 7s, it's not what we're focused on from a professional perspective. It happens. And some of my best friends have come from my professional network. But they're the bonus. That's not, what you're doing it for effectively. There are other ways to make personal friends. But it's lovely when it happens, but that's not the focus. Before we explore that a bit further, just to say, if you are watching on Facebook, YouTube or LinkedIn and you got a question for Luca or for me, or your own thoughts on this as Simon did, then please feel free to add a comment. We've probably got about another 10-15 minutes left of conversation, and we'll be delighted to answer your questions or explore your comments as well. So please add those into the comments box. So on this point of time, Luca, it's very difficult as networks grow, particularly, and the podcast that we published this week or last week, if you're listening now, Jen Snow of the US Air Force said that she had a network of about 14,000 people. Now, when you've got a network of about 14,000 people, it's nigh on impossible to stay in personal contact with all of those people all of the time. So when someone is not necessarily relevant to you in the moment, you don't need to speak to them based on what you're doing. How do you decide when to stay in touch? How often do you try and stay in touch? And how do you organize that? How do you remind yourself?
Well, clearly I have a kind of priority. So I really put contacts in buckets, in different buckets. And let's say I have this kind of 100 maximum people I try to keep on contacting on a regular basis, let's say at least three times per year. And I leave all the others to be somehow updated on my news or whatever is happening through LinkedIn or other social media. That's the only way I found possible to manage a larger. And as in your case, I still have people that I have heard in years and saying, I'm following you on LinkedIn and I know that you're doing this. And I say, wow, that's powerful, because I never mentioned that. We never got in touch anymore. But so this is, I think, we have to do this kind of selective things that some I have to. We all has also to be clear. Some perceive this as a kind of being selfish, or I mean, why you should be selective. You should be open to everyone, and why you should kind of screen out people just because you don't need them now. Reality is that we have to do this, because otherwise we will do horrible with anyone, and instead we have to give some kind of priority. I don't know what's your opinion about that.
Yeah, I mean, well, in terms of connecting with people, I will connect with people who I know, and I'll connect with people who have been on my programs, or listened to the podcast, read the book. I think it's churlish not to. I invite other people who I don't know and have had no previous connection with and have just found me through someone else's update or whatever. I invite them to follow me if they're interested in the topic. But I want to filter the incoming information as well and filter out that noise. There are people who are more open in their approach, and there are valid reasons for that if you've thought it through and strategized it, not just if you're doing it for the sake of it. I think there's a difference between the two. But yeah, the interesting thing that I've become more conscious of over the last couple of years, and it fits with the 7 stages of professional relationship. Once you get to levels 4 and 5, particularly that friend, trust and supporter, you don't actually need to be in constant conversation with each other. There's a brilliant technique. And one of our goals of today's conversation was to give people practical tips. So here's one for you. Write this one down. And it's not mine, and I've never found the source, but it's one I've been sharing for over a decade now. But it's a brilliant approach, and it's once you meet someone 24/7/30, and you follow up within 24 hours. And people say, doesn't that make you look desperate? To which I reply, it's not dating. It makes you look interested, and it's while your conversation is fresh in the memory. Then again, within 7 days, normally I will hold back my LinkedIn connection, and I will send it 7 days later with a personalized request as a second touch point. And then again within 30 days. And what you're looking for are 3 two-way touch points. So you're looking for responses and engagement, not just throwing stuff out there that doesn't get read. But 3 two-way touch points, ideally using different media. So it might be an email, a LinkedIn connection request, a Zoom call, over those 30 days. And then they're in your network. And that relationship has some strength to it. And then you probably want to stay in touch on a reasonably regular basis after that for a while. But at some point, you've then got a second wall built as they've moved into like and trust. So you've built a wall around your network after the 30 days. They're now in your network and they'll stay in. But now you want to move them through and build another wall halfway through, because that relationship's become strong. And then at that point, I've had people reach out to me after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years that we haven't spoken, but because the original relationship was so strong, we could pick it up. That's not an approach I'm suggesting. It is much better to stay in touch much more often than every decade. But it is an interesting dynamic that once there's enough robustness, if that's a word, in your network, it becomes a lot easier to maintain relationships without constantly being in touch with each other.
Absolutely. Let me add one other things that I always stress with people and say, how long does it take to build a relationship? And I say, no, you're getting this wrong. It's not how long, it's how many months or weeks or years. It's how many interaction you have with the person.
Yeah.
And that's so the number of interaction is really the big points. You can have 5 or 6 interaction in 1 month and have the relationship move ahead incredibly fast. Okay, or you can do nothing for 6 months, and certainly the relationship is not going to improve. So always think about not time but number of interactions. Interaction means an email where you, I don't know, send a piece of information, or clearly a video call, or any way, any type of situation when you kind of promise something, you get something. So you always this way, or this way you can build trust, because every time you commit and you deliver, your trust, of course, the trust in you of the other person is gonna go up.
Yeah, and this is very much the topic of the month on the Connected Leadership podcast, because you mentioned that last month as well, and then Martin Gargiulio from INSEAD talked about it earlier this month, and it's absolutely right. It's absolutely key. A few years ago, I was working with a consultancy firm in the pensions industry in the City of London, and I was mentoring a number of their team, and I was spending a whole day in their office mentoring different groups across the day. And about the second or third session, I recognized that the approach we were taking, which was based on my referral book, how do I generate referrals from my network, wasn't relevant to them. It wasn't working because of the nature of the work they did. They couldn't be proactive and seek out referrals, because by the time they knew who to ask for the referral from, the chance had gone, because there was an intermediary in the way who knew when the need came up, and they wouldn't know that need had come up otherwise. So what they needed was to stay front of mind with those intermediaries, ahead of all of their competitors, who were all much bigger global brands than them. And so I came up with a touchpoint spreadsheet. So what the touchpoint spreadsheet is it gamifies staying in touch. So it says, for example, Luca is someone I need to have me front of mind. Therefore, I need to have him on my touchpoint spreadsheet, and I've just met him. So next month, to build that relationship, I want to score 20 points. And you might get 1 point for liking something on social media. You might get 5 points for having a Zoom call to catch up. You might get 10 points for giving a referral. So there's these different ways of scoring points. So I want to score 20 points this month. Let's build the relationship, and 20 points next month as we strengthen it. Then I'll tailor it back to 10. Then I'll go 0 to 5 the next 2 months. Otherwise, Luca's going to think I'm a stalker. Then I'll ramp it up again. But by doing that, you can have the 10 or 15 key people. You can't do this with the whole network, but those key people you need front of mind, and you can really be focused on staying front of mind with them. And it's number of interactions. And what the touchpoint game, if you like, does is it not only looks at the number of interactions, but the impact of each interaction. So I guess it takes that theory that next step. So you can't say a like on LinkedIn, it has the same impact as giving someone a referral.
Absolutely.
But they're both touch points. So we grade the touch points so that you can understand where the impact lies. I'm very aware of the time, so we're coming to the end of the conversation. There's one more thing I do want to talk about before we finish, and well, we haven't touched on this, but I think it's an important one. We talked about finding something in common earlier, and building rapport, and the difficulties online versus face to face. I don't want to, I want to speak generally about this rather than looking purely at pandemic times at the moment. But there are times when there are people who you want to build a relationship with, but you don't find anything in common beyond business, and you don't really click, you don't find that rapport. I talked about people where you might not have that like element in play. How do you deal with that?
Well, I personal experience is that this is very rare. I mean, if we look, the point is that if we look for it, we're gonna find it. So I always have my students and executives make this very simple exercise. I give them 3 or 4 minutes, and ask them to work into, and just ask the other person what the other person does, for example, during his free or her free time, during the weekend, whatever. And I can tell you that even people that never met before, different culture, different age, whatever, in 3 or 4 minutes they will find at least one or two things. So I think the shared thing is there. We just have to discover it. And the point is that we think that we don't have anything in common, so we refrain from asking this kind of question. But I can tell you that 99% of the case, you're going to find it, and find it quickly if you ask the right question. That's always the point. If you want to be, if you are clear with your question, if you're clear with the objective, I think it's definitely possible.
So how do you, I've got my own question that opens up to that, which I'll share in a minute. But for you, how do you ask those questions, and what the questions you ask, so that it feels and sounds natural? It doesn't sound like you've swallowed a book on networking with a list of questions to ask. How do you do that in a natural flow?
Well, of course, you don't start with that. Okay, so you don't say, "Hi, I'm Luca. What do you do in your free time?" Okay, that's for sure. But once you advance a little bit in your conversation, and you may a little bit more about the other person, and remember always my focus in finding a way to help the other person. So certainly we'll go through a question like, what's you're spending most of your time, what's you are focusing on in this moment, what keeps you awake in the night, something like that. I mean, that I adapt to the situation and the reaction of the other person. Of course, I'm trying to read the feedback, but let's say at a certain point, the professional part is almost clear, not done, but it's clear to me. And I acquired this little bit of comfort in this exchange. Well, it's quite natural to say so. I don't know, in this area, it's a beautiful area. I don't know, wherever you are, what do you do in your free time? So, or what do you like to do when we are not on working on something specific? And this is, frankly, it's not very personal. I mean, you allow the other person to answer you the way he or she wants. So it might be very, very personal with his family or a family, but it could be something I do, cycling, or I love to go running. Oh, really? Oh, fantastic. I run too. Let's talk about that. Okay.
My approach is similar. It's what I call the hump day question. And the reason it's called the hump day question is you can't ask it in the middle of the week, the hump day. So in Western society, that will be Wednesday. In other societies, that might be a Tuesday. Tuesday, I think. But any other day you can ask it. So in Western society, on Monday or Tuesday, you say, how was your weekend? And on Thursday or Friday, you say, have you got any interesting plans for the weekend? Very natural question to ask, but it's where, unless someone is really overloaded with work and doesn't have anything else going on, they'll share something. Difficult question to ask during a lockdown, in a pandemic, but you can still do it. But in normal times, much easier. I'll give the last word to Simon, who's still watching on Facebook, and he's looking at this point about like versus trust, and this how much do you need to have that personal relationship? And he said, "Ooh, that's interesting." Putting the ooh in with a bit of as Simon would say it, of course. I'm absolutely no expert here, but my experience has been that if the trust is big enough, the like can be just like enough. It doesn't have to be like a lot. And yes, I would absolutely agree with that. It's my point is, I think that if you do have like a lot, it accelerates everything else. So if we want to get to that level 6, the advocate, yes, you can have people who trust you and are what I call like neutral, who will advocate for you. But they're more likely to if there's like a lot there, because we're going to do more for people we care about. So, but I can think of clients of mine who book me on a regular basis, who recommend me, but I know respect me and I know trust me, but we've never really found rapport. I've got, fortunately, more of my clients where I've got a strong rapport with, and that's probably, they've been clients for longer in most cases because of that. So yeah, I do agree with you, Simon. I think you can bypass like. It's harder if it's dislike, obviously, but you can bypass like. Trust and respect are more important. Absolutely. Simon, thank you very much for your contributions. Luca, thank you so much for yours, as
Thank you.
always. And we'll see you again at the end of March live on LinkedIn, Facebook and YouTube, and at the beginning of April on the Connected Leadership podcast. For everyone who's joined in, thank you very much for joining us. I hope that you found this insightful and helpful. We've tried to be practical this month in our conversation. We've been a bit more theoretical in some of our other ones. I'll be back again with another Connected Leadership podcast live for you very soon. In the meantime, have a great day, and as we're past the hump day, I can say have a great weekend, and I hope that you enjoy it. Thank you very much.